The competitive 40K network presents Art of War. Art of War. Strategy and tactics. Discussions with the best players on the planet. Now your host, Nick Nanavati.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Art of War podcast. This week we are joined by one of our very own Art of War coaches and one of my good friends, Rizvan Martinez from Mexico, now Canada, also known as Archons Skari. Riz, how you doing?
I'm doing great, Nick. Thanks for having me on. Hello, everyone. Looking forward to the chat and sit back, relax, and hopefully you learn some stuff.
For those of you who might not know Archons Skari, the name says it all. He is a Dark Eldar aficionado. He knows all things Drukhari. He is a master of pain. He's also a pretty amazing 40K player representing Canada with their WTC team. He's one of our Art of War coaches, and he's just all around a great dude. And he's coming right off the back of a 5-round GT win with, you guessed it, Drukhari, an army that, by the numbers is doing pretty awfully right now. And there's definitely some more powerful things out there to be explored. So clearly it is a matter of amazing generalship along with faction mastery that is behind the wheel here. And we're going to get to know Riz. We're going to get to know his mastery over Drukhari and how that's evolved over the years and how he keeps on playing and performing as editions change, as metas evolve, and what that looks like. And then ultimately we're going to wrap up this episode with what the list he actually took to victory was at this 5-round GT brought to you by TGX. And then we're going to talk about basically how it works on the macro scale, the broad picture. Then we're going to go head over to part 2. Part 2 is for our Patreons. We love you all so very dearly. And you can become a Patreon if you're not already on AOW40K.com. For $5 a month, you get access to this part 2 along with all 212 other episodes and our amazing Discord server. And in that episode, we're going to talk about exactly how this army plays on the table. Like, where do you put the units? What do you look for? What do you take advantage of? What to avoid? Tactics, matchups, deployments, all of it. So you don't want to miss any of that. Skari, are you ready?
I'm very ready, and I hope everybody's ready as well. As you said, let's step through the webway and into real space. Let's go.
All right, we're going to go on an adventure into real space, everybody. Skari, let me start off with asking you this. How are you finding Drukhari in 10th edition? Obviously, you're finding them pretty good, but be honest here.
The honest answer is they're very bland. That's how I'm finding Dark Eldar.
I'm so sorry to hear that.
What, sorry?
I'm so sorry to hear that.
Yeah, they do a job, and they do it okay. But there's not a lot of wiggle room in terms of the creative outlook of the faction. And that could be said from a lot of factions with the index, of course. We've seen this before when in 8th edition they changed all the books and sent them to indexes. The same back in 3rd edition when all the indexes came back all the way like 20 years ago or whatever. And so that's how I'm finding them. Can they be effective? Yes. Are they the most balanced faction? No. Do they seem very monotone? Yes. However, can you win with them? Well, yes, you can. It's just not for the faint of heart.
Well, I think that's what we're here to unpack. So I'm sorry you're finding them bland, but let's talk about what their playstyle is and how it's changed over time, and then kind of how it wraps into how you like to play the game, which if I recall, last time you were on the show, you mentioned was create some chaos amongst the table and really win all over the table, whatever that means. You can put it into your own words, of course.
Yeah, 100%. Well, the way that the faction works at the moment is a very similar way to how the faction worked in 3rd, 4th, 5th, and a bit of 6th edition as well. 6th and 7th was a bit of a whirlwind because if you weren't really using Eldar allies, Dark Eldar and Eldar were very meshed in together, being quote battle brothers, which is something that they used to do back then. So you were doing stuff like attaching a baron into a seer council and things like that. It was they were interchangeable almost as codexes. But back in the day, the faction was very much shooting based with a couple of close combat pieces and support elements like mandrakes, things like that. And it was all about MSU, fast moving guys in boats, essentially. And then in 9th edition, we had the heyday of Dark Eldar. So anybody who knows anything about Dark Eldar probably knows it from 9th edition, when everyone hopped onto Dark Eldar. It was you just literally went turn 1, move up, turn 2, table your opponent's army. It was very aggressive and very efficient. And you had the double or triple succubus and Drazar just like picking up entire armies. You had liquefire guns being silly and Talos just dominating the tables. And now in 10th, it's taken a step back and is going more to that original style, which is more MSU, shooty, lots of little units. None of them are very effective like by themselves, but they work well if you can like focus your strength on specific parts of the enemy army, with a couple of elements here or there that are supporting elements like mandrakes or a beast pack or maybe a combat character. So that's kind of like the style at the moment.
Awesome. So that's a great history lesson in Drukhari. I would not have put that together. They're the same play styles, 3rd, 4th, or 5th, and then, all the different things. But so right now it's a shooty style army. And if I recall, you're not like against guns or anything, but you like to play do it all kind of army, right?
Yeah, my like you can skew the list and you can do some skewed style builds for, I don't know, team events or to be very good at killing specific things. But there are a couple of rule changes just in general that changed a lot of the way that we use a lot of our weapons. Like poison changed big time to only affect like infantry, turned into anti-infantry, which means things that used to help us against like monsters and bikes and like other things that are now mounted or beasts, they don't really work anymore. So there are certain matchups that get really hard. And you can skew towards them with like more lances or less lances or more haywire, etc. However, the faction rule being very, very strong with the full rerolls, which is excellent, is sort of like juxtaposed to a detachment that is sort of pointless, where you get more of those little pain tokens if you take characters, but the faction itself actually works best if you take the least amount of characters possible, because you want more points in more little crap everywhere. So it's like and then the stratagems are very specific to like units, so you're not really using the detachment almost at all. There's like a couple of strats that you use and like maybe a character or two, and so it feels like I cannot wait for a codex. Let's put it that way.
I so understand that. It's very similar to how my demons feel. I feel like I take a whole detachment to deep strike 3 inches away.
Correct. It's like the one thing you're doing, right? Here I'm like, yes, I can move off, at the end of the shooting phase like an elf, because that's an elf thing. That's like the only thing I'm really using. And I'm using mainly like grenade and tank shock from like the main rule book,
So let me ask you this. In times like this, when you're dealing with an index, the index is kind of subpar, if not in power, which I think we can both agree that it kind of is, but also in overall flavor. It's bland, right? This is the first Dark Eldar episode we've done since 10th edition's launch. That's how much it's making waves. And you're a 40K expert. Like, why not dabble in other things or stuff? Or how do you keep yourself going in these times? Because I'm sure a lot of people are playing Drukhari, or maybe you're not in love with their index, and they have to figure it out. What do they do with their hobby?
Yes, 100%. Like, there was a lot of people who invested heavily in the faction. They loved the way the faction played, and they were either diehard like Incubi Drazar fans, or they were diehard like crazy Succubus Witch Helion fans, or they were crazy like they loved all the Talos Coven stuff, right? Or whatever it was. And then it really flipped it on its head. So a lot of people who had this sort of picture of what Dark Eldar was, it sort of like changed the play style so drastically that a lot of people were sort of alienated from that. Now, something that keeps me going is, number one, I own every model, right, from the Dark Eldar range, which is one of the biggest barriers to enjoying Dark Eldar right now. You cannot buy a Beast Pack. You cannot buy Mandrakes. You cannot buy, like, a lot of these, the Court of the Archon, for example. They're all fine cast models that are out of production. And unless you buy them secondhand or convert them or print them or do something along those lines, you're not really going to be able to like test a lot of the stuff that's in the index, even in the index itself. Like, you buy a starter set that's Dark Eldar, you're going to get Incubi, an Archon, a squad of Cavalite Warriors, a Ravager, and a unit of Cavalite Warriors, right? And an Archon. And the Incubi are like pretty bad right now. So like you basically get Cabalites, which are great, an Archon, which is okay. And then you get a Ravager, which is okay, and like a Raider, which is okay. But ideally, you want like Venoms, and you want a Beast Pack, and you want Mandrakes. Like you need, in order to really get the juices out of the faction itself right now. So it can be, the barrier of entry just is tough for newer players, and it can really put people off because they're like, I want to buy this stuff, but I can't. And so they're like, whatever, I'll just play Space Marines or whatever. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. So like, how do you actually get enjoyment out of it?
So I changed the list up based on that as much as I can. Like I have tested pretty much whatever you can think about testing with Dark Eldar. I've done an army that was all Witch Cult. I've done it like all Witch Cult. I've done an army. I took it to a GT of just Coven. No non-Coven stuff. I did an army which was 4 planes, like 2 bombers and 2 Razorwing jet fighters, and like Ravagers and Scourge, like all shooting just a bunch of planes and stuff. I've done my more balanced approach, which is like a little bit of everything, one of each character. So that's how I stay involved, is I just test some weird wacky concepts because I own the models and I can put them on the table and see what it feels like and see if it changes the way the faction plays, or if I can like squeeze any juices out of it. And that's instead of just playing 15 Scourge, 15 Mandrakes, 30 Cabalites, some Venoms, and like an Archon, right? Which is what most people own. And so they're just they just play that over and over and over again, and it can feel very bland, 3-4 months in or whatever from the edition, 6 months in?
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, I know you have like everything for Drukhari. You're a Drukhari aficionado, and it's been like, 5-6 months, like you said, since we started 10th edition. So you've got to mix it up to enjoy it. So with all of that, is the list you took to this tournament, the Secret Sauce as it's titled, is this Secret Sauce, in your opinion, like the strongest Drukhari list that you can make, or is this just a variation?
I think I've come up with 2 or 3 lists that I would consider strong. Surprisingly enough, the double Void Raven, double Razorwing jet fighter list was incredibly strong. Like, surprised me even how strong it was.
Just beta striking people with planes and shit.
It just tabled people is what it did. It just came up and it was so many dice and just killed everything. It was just fantastic. So that was like one, but it was very skewed in terms of damage output. My other one was the one I took to the Capital City Bloodbath, which is a more balanced approach list, which had like a Solitaire in it, had like the Ravagers and Scourge. It was like worked on some allies, right, to kind of support the lack of close combat, etc. So that's like a more balanced list, no Talos or whatever. And then this list, which I think is probably the strongest with the current meta that we're seeing evolve, which is a bunch of Gladius tanks and Redemptor Dreadnoughts and Sagittor Votan, and I think this is definitely very good into the current meta. So I would say it is the secret sauce.
Well, I'm here to unpack it with you, Skari. So, top to bottom, what is the secret sauce?
So we start now. I will quote, adapted the list that I took to the event since the event. I've changed. It was a very quick change, but basically it's just take a Raider out, add Urien, and then switch a unit of Rax for a Reaver Jet Bike unit. Essentially giving me something to heal my Talos and give me another thing that is tough to kill, which is Urien Rakarth. But all in all, the list is a Beast Pack Master, 3 squads of Cabalite Warriors, 2 units of Rax, which are 5 strong, 3 Venoms and a Raider, 1 Kronos, 3 units of 5 Scourge with Dark Lances, 3 units of Mandrakes, and 3 units of 2 Talos, with Haywire Blaster, Talos Gauntlet, and the twin-linked Liquefier Gun. And that is 2,000 points on the nose.
I am pretty surprised, honestly, to not just see 3 Ravagers being the starting point of this list. I'm sure you're going to school me on why that is the case. But in your words, Skari, what is this list trying to do? How does it play on the table?
This list plays, I have a bunch of stuff on the table. I have a bunch of shooting, and it's more than you have. and I love leverage it, right? But like that is literally how it plays. That's just the concept.
Yeah, I mean, lots of stuff everywhere is great, but it is literally made of paper, right? It's like, how are you?
Correct.
How are you living with it to do stuff? How are you holding primary? Is a great question.
So the Talos really help with the primary contesting, that's one of the reasons I decided, like, my normal list is very similar to this, but it took out the Talos and added 3 Ravagers and a Plane, right? So that's sort of like the other version of the list, which is still a very strong list, but the Talos give you a little bit of muscle in the middle of the board, which help you with the primary game. And the way that you play primary with this list is by using the Cabalites to stick you the objectives while you sort of like sweep forward into the enemy lines and force them to deal with like the waves of little shit that's going to just take away their scoring potential. And even though it doesn't look like a lot, this list can pick up 20 Terminators in a turn.
Excuse me, what? This army can kill 20 Terminators? This is Cabalite Warriors, Raiders, Venoms, and Talos.
And this, I'm not talking out of my butt. It has teeth in shooting, and the key here, though, is this is not an individually strong piece style army. This is the sum of its parts of the strength. So if you want to kill a unit or multiple units, you have to use movement to essentially converge the strength onto very specific parts of the battlefield that you need to just wipe out.
Right.
But if you can. Correct. So you basically move all over the table, but when you really need to hit hard, you have to sort of like get into where you need to go and get all of your elements to target 1 or 2 things, and the firepower is enough to just eliminate those things from the board.
Yeah, kind of like 1 unit Scourges doesn't reliably kill anything, but 3 units should kill something,
Yeah, 3 units plus the Talos, plus the Cabalites and Venoms, plus the Mandrakes, plus the Beast Pack. Like, you have to like focus your strength. You can't be splitting fire with this list or trying to kill a tank with like 1 Dark Lance at a time. Like, you have to really focus your strength on elements of the army.
So how do you play this game like tempo-wise? I understand it's moving all over the place. Mandrakes can go up and down into reserves, which helps them a lot. Mm-hmm. But you're a bunch of transports. You make objectives sticky. You're all made of paper, and you're kind of big and not the easiest to hide, especially with a lot of them. So how do you maneuver around the board? What's like your average game look like?
It is not a cut and paste style list. So you cannot play this list and go, okay, so I'm going to run these guys up turn 1 and these guys up turn 2. That's not how this list plays. And if you try and do that, you're going to just get tabled. The key to the list is doing it in waves. So essentially deploying in a way where your first turn movement gets you to a staging area, but not necessarily into the middle of the board. Like, you're staging for lines of sight and angles on things. So moving into a position where the next turn you can get multiple angles down a laneway, for example. And it relies on you understanding where your opponent is going to move their units. So they're going to move that tank up in this general area. So you have to sort of get into position to get ready to jump out and kill it, is what it comes down to. Now, ideally, you're screening with the racks. You're putting them out front because when they die, they give you pain tokens. You have to sort of put your Chronos in a centralized location to take advantage of the pain token mechanic to regenerate them and refund them. And what I'm trying to do early game is sort of like keep the Talos alive, but be patient. So keep the Talos alive behind like line of sight blocking buildings or things like that. And then when I can, I jump them out to make sure they try and kill something. So then they're pain token for the rest of the game, which then helps with my pain token economy. And if I can get all 3 units of Talos I use them as one big unit of 6, essentially. Right, so they're kind of all helping each other out on like a flank or the middle of the board to really get rid of like the Wraith Guard or get rid of like the Terminator brick that went into the middle, or trying to get all the Haywire on the tank to get rid of that Land Raider or whatever it is. While the Scourge, the Mandrakes, and the little units of Cabalites stick you the objectives and essentially screen the entire backboard so that like nothing is allowed to go behind me or in between me. It's all in front of me, so I can focus the Talos and the strength of my list where I can manage it.
Right. And that's really great, just generally speaking, like keeping your opponent on one side, screening everything behind you, keeps them in front of you. Like you said, you can focus which areas of the board you're poking on, and you can move block really effectively. I imagine that is a tactic you use all the time. Yeah. How do you do move blocks with this army?
So the key of the Venoms filled with Cabalite Warriors for move blocks. because you can get a unit of Cavalites out. They move, they're out 3, they move 8, they can advance, and then you can strike and fade them to move another 8. So you can really move like 20 inches up the board and try and just get in the way of things that you need to stop from essentially getting into your backfield and help so you can score your primary scoring for as long as possible. And that's really the key. I'm using those little units to essentially stop my opponent from being able to focus their strength on the Talos mainly, which are the strength of the list.
So let's get a little more specific into the Talos, since you've stated like the focal point. You use them like a unit of 6. I think that's pretty interesting. So that way they can support each other, and like you can't just attack 2, you have to attack 2 and then get hit back by 4. So how does that? What are you going after with that unit? When do you commit it?
So a lot of the times I'll keep them at range as long as possible. And it's designed because I have such a long-ranged army. Like I've got Scourge, I've got the Venoms. I can put a lot of damage down range. So what I'm trying to do is force my opponent to commit into the list and then counter, right? Like I want my opponent to send the Incarn up into the middle of my army because then I can kill it. It's like right in front of me and it's easy for me to deal with. I want my opponent to send that big unit of Hearthguard into the middle of my army, because once the Hearthguard is in my army, I can focus on it and deal with it. So ideally what I'm doing is sort of like spending maybe 1 or 2 turns at range, using Scourge, jumping and shooting to like just pick like little, like the speedy parts of my opponent's up. I'm trying to kill transports. I'm trying to kill things that have jetpacks or jump packs, because I want to be the fastest army on the board. I'm using most of my resources on screening the entire board, especially if they have a 3-inch deep strike, where everybody gets out of the Venoms themselves. Like I just use like this big maze of everything's within 6 inches of each other, so that you just cannot come in within 3. And then I wait, and once they commit, everybody hops into transports. The Talos are ready to go, and I just try and kill the main pieces that they're using to bully me off a primary, while then sending a unit 20 inches forward to capture enemy outposts and drop them to 0 primary. And doing that once or twice a turn, if they score 0 primary and I score 10, it's very hard to come back from that in terms of points.
Yeah, you're not looking to necessarily win the game by killing your opponent or contesting primary every single turn. But if you can hold pace with a 10 and then give your opponent a kneecap primary turn once or twice, the game's pretty much wrapped up right there. And I imagine your secondaries just fall into place with this army. How does your secondaries work?
Now, the list is great because it can do fixed or tactical, whichever way I need. If I feel I'm going to be using a lot of command points, I'll usually go for tactical just to give me the option for the extra command point. And I've got lots of units. The Mandrakes especially, they're like a key part of the list that I try and keep alive as long as possible. They get me all of those investigate signals and deploy homers and behind enemy lines a lot of the times. But I can go fixed. Sometimes I don't want to have to maneuver around the board. I want to hide on the edge of the table and just send 1 unit into the middle, because if not, I'm going to get charged by berserkers or whatever. So I'll do like deploy teleport homer and maybe engage on fronts or something, so that I can dictate the pace of my game. And I like that there are a lot of units that I can do either or, and I have lots of anti-tank and lots of anti-infantry, which allows me to do something like bring it down as effectively as it does, just a maneuvering one.
And a lot of that anti-tank you mentioned comes in the form of the Haywire that your Talos are packing. Do you find this leaves you a little weak to like not specifically vehicles, not specifically infantry armies, monsters as an example?
I love Haywire. The fact that now, if they were just on a Scourge unit, they probably wouldn't. You would be right, but on Talos, they're twin linked, and with devastating wounds, the amount of times I've just rolled a couple of 6s and done 6 damage to a monster, right? They don't get a save or anything like that. It can, it is a lot more than you expect.
I didn't realize. So what's the profile of these Haywire things?
So they're 24 inches, 2 shots each. I think they're strength 3 AP 1. They're 3 damage. They're anti-vehicle 4+ devastating wounds.
So you're fishing for 6s pretty much.
And they're twin linked.
Yeah, and you're reroll wounds, so it's not even that hard. And across 6 of them, it's 12 shots. It's not that bad.
Yeah, even against something like Terminators, or I don't know, like I recently played into Chaos Space Marines, and they were fantastic into the Chosen. Right, they'd shoot into a Chosen. Every 6 I rolled was just a dead Chosen. You know, it was just
that gets
it was
annoying
just
fast. Yeah.
it does. And if you've got all 12 shots of Talos shooting at a unit with a pain token, I'm rerolling hits, I'm rerolling wounds. Like I'm going to roll a couple of 6s, and then that big unit, that possessed or that chosen unit with the Lord, all of a sudden doesn't look so hot. You know what I mean? And then if you're going to a lot of infantry or whatever, or like other stuff, you've got the liquefier guns, which are also twin linked. So I'm getting a lot of reroll wounds in those units at range, which then increases their efficiency. So therefore, it doesn't look like a lot, but it's efficient shooting. If that makes sense.
No, it really does. It's very efficient in lots of small places, which, like you said, converge into actual damage. It's really easy to disrespect your army's damage. I'm looking at this, and prior to this explanation, I'm like, you can't kill anything. Like, what are you doing out here? But now I can see each Raider's got a Dark Lance. Each Warrior Squad's got a Dark Lance. The Scourges are 12 Dark Lances. The Talos are no slouches. Is there any other damage I'm not seeing here?
So yeah, you've got the Blaster, the Dark Lances, the Splinter Cannons are probably the secret sauce in a lot of cases, because the Venoms themselves.
Secret sauce in the secret sauce?
In the secret sauce. They're more like a unit that probably, like a Venom with double cannon and a squad inside with a cannon, has 9 heavy bolters shots, basically.
That is not bad, right?
Right? They're sustained, and with a pain token, you have more reroll hit rolls. So all of a sudden, I've gone up and go, here's like a unit of infiltrators, and you shoot with 1 Venom with 5 Cabalites inside, and you do something like 12 wounds or whatever, and they just either pick up an entire unit of infiltrators or whatever it is. And sometimes you shoot into like a vehicle, and you're fishing for 6s, but every failed save is 2 damage, and then all of a sudden you do a couple of wounds to like a tank or a monster that they weren't expecting, right?
So remind me the stats of a Splinter Cannon.
It's 36 inches. They're 3 shots each. Anti-infantry 3+, strength 3, AP 1, 2 damage, sustained hits.
Yeah, I mean, into infantry, that will add up really fast. Like, no one wants to be shot by that. That is really fascinating.
Yeah,
so go ahead.
Yeah, so the 3 Venoms are basically little gunboats, right? And then in this list, I have 2 units of Cabalites with Dark Lances and Blasters go into the Raider to make essentially a makeshift Ravager. It's got 3 Dark Lances and 2 Blasters out of that tank as well.
So you have 1 Raider that gets all of the anti-tank weapons, and then each Venom becomes like a triple heavy bolter, a lot of splinter rifle shot thing flying.
Yes. And I have 1 Venom that also has a Dark Lance and a Blaster in it based on the split. And then 5 Cabalites basically just have rifles, and they go into strategic reserve because they pop in on a corner or come out or whatever and force you to like zone them out so they don't stop you from scoring primary.
Nice. And your racks are kind of frontline people?
Yes, because when they die, they give me a pain token. And in this list, I only have 3 pain tokens for being a strike force. So I want them to get killed as quickly as possible, or they kill something to get me extra pain tokens, just to kind of keep the pain token flowing through the 2nd and 3rd turn, which is when it's usually the tightest.
Talk to me about these pain tokens. Obviously, you expend them for reroll hits on whatever you want to reroll hits. But in the way your army plays tempo-wise, do you find you have like an infinite amount of everybody reroll hits? If not, how do you prioritize it?
So priority is the Scourge, number 1, because they hit on 4s. You really need the pain tokens on the Scourge. Now, early on, though, I tried to also give them to the Talos when I can make sure that they're going to kill something. So killing something will get me a pain token for the Talos, and then the Talos are empowered with a pain token for the entire game as soon as they kill something, which could be a range or in combat, which is awesome. And then there might be 1 or 2 turns where I'm working off of like 1 or 2 pain tokens, and so it's very, very tight. And that's where the Chronos comes in. You try to put it on something, you roll the dice, it gives you another one. You can kind of empower multiple units with a pain token, which is like one of the handiest ways to use a Chronos. And then eventually, turn 3, turn 4, like you just get some kills. And I would say don't be shy with your pain token expenditure. Like spend your pain tokens, and then when you get kills, you'll have pain tokens in the charge phase and the fight phase, but don't be afraid to use them.
You always have that kind of mindset. I've noticed when you play with you, like spend your command points, use the CP reroll, use the pain tokens. Is that a Drukhari thing, or is that like a personal Skari thing?
I think it's both. I think it works well with the Drukhari, but when it comes to like, I'm not really the kind of player that holds on to my command points until I have like 6 or 7 for like a go turn. I'm like, I want to make sure I'm using my resources when I have them to just make sure that I have them and that I use them effectively. So I guess it's more of a personality trait.
Nice. It's interesting because you say like use your pain tokens like as soon as there's value to get with them, as opposed to like save for like a convergence turn on turn 2 or 3. How does that look like when you're actually playing games? Are you killing stuff pretty reasonably on the first couple turns, and then going for a turn 3 kill, or is it all just throughout the game?
It's throughout the entire game. Of course, but you could play into like the Grey Knight. I recently played into like the Grey Knight Terminator spam build, which is why I can tell you that I can kill 20 Terminators in a turn. But
with confidence.
Yeah, when I say stuff, it's comes from like I experienced this. It's not a lot of guest listing. It's like this is something I have done. No, but so in that style of game, like the pain tokens were less. They weren't flowing as much. Why? Because they were big units. I had to kill like a little unit here every once in a while to get a pain token. So I was really relying on like just rolling the dice straight up, if that makes sense. And then trying to force like a battle shock test here or there to try and get some extra pain tokens. But normally it's there's like an ebb and flow. You start with 3 in this list. I might spend 2 or 3 like turn 1 or turn 2 and get like 1 back maybe, and then so I have like 1 turn of doing 1. But as soon as the Talos really get involved, then I get a bunch of pain tokens because they'll kill tanks, so they'll kill infantry or things like that. And then turn 4 or 5, I usually can just pain token everything.
Yeah, so it kind of escalates as the game goes on.
Correct.
Now, when I looked at your army on the offset, I assumed this was a points factory, move block, stall out, play people, and use that ticket to victory, minimal damage to kill like what you have to. And the more we've kind of discussed this, I'm kind of feeling that this is actually a damage army that is also very good at points, or it can do both. Do you usually find yourself getting tabled by the end of the game, or are you doing the tabling? How's that look?
I have, with this list, I've found myself doing the tabling more often than getting tabled.
Really? It looks so unassuming.
Exactly. Right.
I'm so excited.
It does until you play against it. And then, and then people go, how do you just have so much stuff? And they, like I played against, look, one of the armies that I would say, like I played into the new Votan army. So 6 Agitators, all this stuff, right? And that's a great example because they also had a ton of stuff, right? So at the end of the game, I didn't table him, but he had like a couple of Sagittators left, 10 little dudes left, and like that was it, And I still had 3 units of Scourge, 3 units of Mandrakes. Like I still had so much more on the board, and it's just this list really kills stuff. It's crazy how much damage it is, but you just can't go into the open and expect to live. Like that's not how this list works. You have to play around the terrain a lot.
Yeah, no, I actually have 2 more questions for you, but I'm so excited to get to part 2 because that's going to be like literally where you teach me how to play this army because it looks so fun. I can't believe you're killing people with this. There's Beastmasters, and I know you're a big fan of weird units and Beastmasters, but what the hell are these guys doing here for?
Back in 6th edition or 7th edition, a Dark Eldar army started with a 15 or 20 point Lamian as the only HQ. And what you did with her is you sat her in the back corner and reserved your entire army. And that was how you played Dark Eldar back then. So this is essentially kind of like a throwback into don't spend a lot of points on characters. The Archon is okay, gets can vect a stratagem, sure. Does a little bit of damage, sure. A Homunculus is probably the best character that we have, has precision, makes racks better, so he can be quite useful. Any of the succubuses and Drazar, like they're lackluster right now. I'm hoping that there is a detachment that makes them cool. So what I decided to do is I need to spend my HQ points on something that's going to be useful for me. A Beast Pack Master is a 105 point unit that is 20 toughness 4 wounds.
That is not bad.
It
That's
has
really good, actually.
It's cultist level point for point, wound for wound. And it has a 9-inch scout move with a 12-inch move.
My new question is, why don't you have 3 of these?
There are lists that have 3 of them. You can actually make more. Now, I just need the 1 unit. The 1 unit, if I go first, scouts 9 up, moves 12, and doesn't let you leave your deployment zone.
Yeah, that's the kind of move blocking I'm talking about. Awesome.
Right? So that I'll tell you, the Beastpack Monster wins me more games than I can count, because I can throw up a flank. And you know how you're saying that I'm having, like, you have a hard time scoring primary? Well, the Beastpack Monster solves that issue, because I can move the Beastmaster up, move the Venoms into place. By the time you dealt with the Beastpack Monster, I've stickied the objectives I need to sticky, and I can leave the objectives and go and do other stuff.
Wow. My last question, Skari, is maybe like just a sum of the fact where you started. You played every unit in this codex so many times, but how did you come up with this strategy? Like, I played a lot of 40K. I played 20 years of Warhammer, and I've come up with weird approaches to winning games, but this is off the wall and awesome. Like, how did you come up with this?
I looked at it, and it's basically just almost 30 years of practice, Nick.
It's got me beat. Straight up.
A couple of mantras that I live by. Number 1, everything in your army is going to die. Just get used to this. If you finish the game with units that are left alive, you didn't use them as effectively as you could have. Number 1. Number 2 is I needed to have enough speed and maneuverability around the board, and something that could bully the middle of the table. And then what I did is I made the sacrifice of, like, I need to just be more efficient with my points. So I made the sacrifice to, like, not take an Archon, even though I really enjoy my Archon, and he's like, Skari, the Archon, or whatever. Like, I was trying to build a competitive list, so I had to sort of, like, take a step back and go, the Archon doesn't really do anything for me. I'm going to maximize every single point that I have in my army. And that's how I've came up with this list. Now, as for gaming with it, I've played like 30 games with this list. Like, I've played a lot of Warhammer with this list, or variations of something very similar to this. So I've had a lot of practice with it even before I went to the tournament. It was like trial and error, just trying to test stuff out.
Yeah, I mean, I'm blown away, man. This is really, really impressive stuff here. And the fact that I can now see it, right? Like, I know you as a player. I played against you, and I respect it. And I really assume this would be a lot of tactical advice in exercise in how to tactically outplay people. But this is not what that is. This is a murder machine with objective scoring, layers upon layers of depth to its strategy. I am so excited, Skari. You have no idea. And especially, you already described it. The way you play each game is not cookie cutter. You can't just do X, Y, and Z on repeat, which makes part 2 that much more valuable when we talk about individual matchups, how you went 5-0 with this, where you put the models, what was the tempo of move blocking and resource expenditure, what happens when you go second with that beast bag. We're going to answer all those questions in part 2, everybody. Skari, thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Thanks for listening, everybody. I hope you have been inspired, and might put the foot in the water. The Anthony Vanellas of the world can, get their Talos on, baby.
Yeah, I hope so. I have a Drukhari army sitting in a shelf, and I might bust it out right here. Listeners, thank you so much for listening. You can join us for part 2 of the discussion on AOW40K.com. You have access to this part 2 along with all the others and our Discord server. If not, we'll see you next week, everybody. Thanks so much for listening.
Like what you just listened to? Check out Art of War Down Under and Art of War Unbroken on the competitive 40K network. The Art of War 40K.com.